Hello, hello, hello. I'm HoJo.
And I'm Hunnsy.
And welcome to this, the 22nd episode of HoJo and Hunnsy's Hard Rock House, the safe space for old rock gumbies just like us. Ted Nugent once said if it's too loud, you're too old, but he's now 75. I wonder how his hearing is.
Is he? Is he 75?
He's 75 years old, Huns.
Is he still a mad, let's just shoot defenceless animals and...
We really don't want to go down that rabbit hole.
But Double Gonzo Live, what a record, eh?
Wang Dang Sweet Princess. Actually, my favourite title of Ted Nugent's is In 10 Cities, in 10 Cities.
Yeah, that's a good one.
I saw him in Manchester when I was very young. It'd be probably 1980 when he was on the Scream Dream tour. I just remembered how he came on stage.
Was he wearing a loincloth?
He was wearing a loincloth and he came on stage swinging from a rope like Tarzan. He went from one side of the stage to the other right at the start. It's such a shame that Ted Nugent turned out to be an absolute arsehole. Some of his rock and roll shenanigans were great, weren't they?
I got the Damn Yankees lineup, apart from him. What was he doing in Damn Yankees?
Well, it was always weird to me. Ted Nugent talked a good game, didn't he? He always went on about if it's too loud, you're too old, and this guitar can blow the balls off a rampaging rhinoceros at 20 paces and all that kind of stuff. And then you heard his records and they were a bit like, well, can't you turn the overdrive pedal on a bit more, mate? It's not exactly Sabbath, is it?
And he did have that brilliant T-shirt. The front of it, animals are wonderful or something. In
I love animals.
And on the back it just said they taste great, which is quite funny.
Sorry to the single-digit vegetarian listeners.
Or the vegan listeners.
So let's kick things off in the usual way. Let's roll it around the tongue and you tell me, old friend, what it is that's been floating your rock and roll boat, which is what I said last week, I think, floating your rock and roll boat. Is there such a thing? There is those cruises, isn't there? Do you think you and I could have some fun on one of those rock and roll cruise boats?
I think it'd be amazing. I know a few people who've been on quite a few of them, and they've had a great time hanging out with old members of Kicks.
Are there any young members of Kicks?
But some of the footage is great when you see some of the bands that are doing it. You know,
How much does it cost to go on one of those things?
I think it's a good couple of grand.
Okay, so you've got to be pretty invested, both metaphorically and literally.
Yeah, I think it's an all-inclusive thing.
What, all the bands you can eat? All-inclusive is good and bad at one and the same time, I think.
Our good friend Dave Alder, he went on one.
Did he?
But he said it was absolutely hilarious. Carnage everywhere. Loads of people trying to relive the 80s.
When I see adverts for them, the list of bands is just endless. It's like there's about 180 bands. I don't know how they get them all on one ship.
It's like a proper cruise.
Several decks.
Yeah, several decks. I think,
What do they have? Do they have like the thrash deck and the glam deck and the AOR deck and all that?
I don't know, but it sounds like a good idea.
Would you wear a captain's hat?
Definitely. Which band would you have headlining?
It's quite tricky, isn't it, that? They've got to be from the glory days, haven't they? But they can't be still at the top of their pulling power. What's the level?
I would have Demoles.
Demoles headlining?
Maybe not headlining. I'd probably have Night Ranger headlining.
Yeah, they'd probably do it, wouldn't they?
Are we going to talk about what I've been listening to?
Go on then, let's get into it. What have you been listening to?
I was inspired by something that you talked about on last week's pod, where you were quite vitriolic towards press officers writing press releases about bands and how their album was unleashed.
Unleashed, terrible word.
One of the examples that you cited, I couldn't remember the name of the New York band, and I went, could have been the Throbs, which led me to go, right, this week I've been listening to the first album, the only album apart from an attempt to come back later on down the line, by New York City band The Throbs that came out in 1991.
The Throbs was mentioned in dispatches a lot when the Wild Hearts were kind of in their pomp in the UK, weren't they? Am I right in thinking that Ginger was in The Throbs for about 5 minutes?
Ginger was in the Throbs for about 5 minutes. He did one gig with them in New York. The Throbs, at the time, were being cited as the next Guns N' Roses. Are you familiar with this album?
No, I've never heard it.
Yeah, I think you'd quite like it. It's called The Language of Thieves and Vagabonds.
What label was it on, Hunnsy?
Geffen. The graveyard for many a band.
Except for Guns N' Roses.
Except for Guns N' Roses.
And Whitesnake.
And Whitesnake, yeah. I remember this album when it came out. I remember getting it. I put it in the same sort of bracket as that Rock City Angels album, again, on Geffen. I would imagine the record company went, oh, no, it's hair metal's dead, get rid of them quick, dump them, blah, blah. It wasn't. This record was not a hair metal record. Their look was different, their sound was different. It was an album produced by Bob Ezrin as well.
Interesting. Most people will know from his work with Alice Cooper and Kiss.
Bob Ezrin and Dick Wagner were the producers.
Dick Wagner was the guitar player in Alice Cooper's band, wasn't he?
Correct. And there are a couple of tracks on this album where you can clearly hear early Alice Cooper, not the terrible Alice Cooper. The last track in particular.
What's that one called?
I should have done my research. Oh, it's called Strange Behaviour. The first track is called Underground. I think you'd really like it. It's very Gene Loves Jezebel. It's got that sort of glammy, gothy, punky sound. And then the next two tracks are very get down, rock and roll stuff. And then there's a track called Dreaming, which could have been lifted off Aerosmith's Draw the Line album. It's got that Kings and Queens vibe. And then track 5, Honey Child, is just a Stones ballad. Brilliant. Rip It Up, classic rock and roll. Ocean of Love has got a real groove to it. Loads of strings on it. And then track 8, called Only Way Out. I think it's that track that Dawn After Dark never recorded.
Do you? Is that good?
It's that good. I think it sounds like a track that you could do, right? But the most amazing thing about this album, there's a track called Ecstasy, which is a really, really good track.
The Killer Rave Drug Ecstasy?
It's not about the Killer Rave Drug Ecstasy. I don't know.
Okay.
It might be. Do you know who plays piano on that track? It's Little Richard.
Little Richard? They got Little Richard to play on it. Wow.
Little Richard plays on this record. It's a great record.
Were any known people? Anyone who went on to do anything?
Yeah, quite a few. So I've met actually one of them.
Who have you met?
The guitarist, Roger Erickson.
Right, he didn't go on to do anything, did he?
He did. He went on to form Smash Gladys.
Okay, right.
Do you remember Smash Gladys?
Smash Gladys. I was talking about people who went on to do anything now.
He actually was in Smash Gladys before the Throbs. Ronnie Sweetheart. Right?
That's not his real name.
He was in a band with Sebastian Bach before. Danny Nordal. He's now in Faster Pussycat.
Okay. Not A-lister rock stars, let's be honest.
No, there was a second album in 2014, but I don't think it actually did anything. But if you want to go back and listen to a record that was tipped to be the next Guns N' Roses, it's much better than Guns N' Roses, in my opinion.
Wow, a bold statement. And you said it was 91 that it came out?
1991.
Yeah, which is, as we've said before, the graveyard of rock, isn't it? 1991 was the year when rock fell off a cliff.
Yeah.
Because you said at the start when we were talking about this that they were wrongly dismissed as a kind of a glam metal band.
They didn't look like a glam metal band. They wore eyeliner, but they wore paisley shirts. It was more Small Faces meets 70s Stones. They looked really, really cool. They did look different.
But everything that was trying to do sleaze rock, and then the whole thing just fell off a cliff when Nirvana came along.
They were dropped by Geffen after 6 months of that album coming out. As much as they were labelled as the next Guns N' Roses, they sound nothing like Guns N' Roses. Probably
above all just a question of wrong place, wrong time, because as we know, great music doesn't always reach a big audience, does it?
Correct. And go and listen to that track that I told you sounds like a Dawn After Dark track.
Remind me which track it is?
It's Only Way Out.
So there you go. Good choice, Hunnsy. One that I've
Throbs.
never heard of. There isn't a lot of music that we talk about on the pod where I go, I've never listened to anything by them. But there's one I'm going to go and check out.
The Language of Thieves and Vagabonds.
Marvellous.
By the Throbs. That's my choice this week. What's yours?
My choice is probably one that you're going to find slightly weird. For a couple of reasons, really. Number one, the band is Anthrax. And you know I'm not the world's greatest thrash metal fan.
No.
And number two, the album is called Volume 8, The Threat Is Real. It's not one of the first Anthrax albums that jumps to people's minds when you talk about Anthrax. It's not Among the Living or Spreading the Disease.
Yeah.
So do you know this record? Volume 8, The Threat Is Real, recorded and released in 1998.
It's the one with the big pool ball on the cover.
Correct. Not what I would consider one of the greatest album covers of all time, I must say.
No. You've been listening to it?
Yeah, it's a really weird one. I can't remember how I started listening to this album after many years of not listening to Anthrax music at all. My declared interest in Anthrax is that I met them very early on in their career, probably about 1985. I was in New York and I was the first person to interview them for Kerrang! When they had the Armed and Dangerous EP. I don't know if you remember that. It was like 6 songs, really quite poor production, but it was very early doors on the Mega Force label.
So before they released Spreading the Disease?
Yeah, prior to Spreading the Disease. And I met them in New York. And like the guys, liked the fact that they were the first thrash band that I'd heard that had a proper singer. They'd just got Joey Belladonna in.
Have you seen some of the footage of Joey Belladonna singing Journey?
Oh, yeah, and he's incredible, isn't he? Because I know when they found him, he wasn't interested in thrash metal. He was a classic rock guy.
Incredible vocalist.
So that's why they piqued my interest, and I like that mix. And anyway, long story short, became friends with him, did quite a lot of work with him in Kerrang in the early days. And we'll talk about that later, because that was going to be my little segue, but we'll get back to that. So I was a fan of the band, even though I wasn't a huge thrash metal fan generally. I really liked Anthrax. I liked their attitude. I liked the fact that they didn't take it very seriously, that they had something different about them with the whole skate thing. They liked rap music. They were open about liking different kinds of music. Charlie Benante, the drummer, right from the get-go, was a huge U2 fan. So I saw something in them that made me think, they're more interesting than your straight down the line thrash, Sabbath and nothing but Sabbath type band. As I moved on and they moved on, we lost contact, and I lost contact with the music as well. I can't remember how I ended up coming across this. Maybe it was one of those Spotify moments when something just comes up in your streaming. And there was a track and I just went, I really like this. What's this? And then I think it might well have been the song Catharsis from Volume 8, The Threat Is Real. They brought John Bush in from Armoured Saint, known in the Kerrang office as Armoured Donut for reasons one day that we'll explain. And John Bush was a really great vocalist and completely changed the sound of the band. He was not one of those kind of high-pitched guys like Joey Belladonna was. He was more rough and ready. Very nice tone to his voice, but he wasn't a screamer. And I thought it suited the music on this album really, really well. And it was a very different record. I did some research, Hunnsy, and found out that Scott Ian said, I'm still proud of the songs we wrote for Volume 8. They were really diverse and heavy, modern sounding with a crushing metal groove. 1998 is the year new metal took over, but we were definitely not a part of that scene. If anything, we were old metal, so getting anyone to support us was proving difficult. It was an album that came out and slipped between the cracks because it wasn't front and centre of what was happening. New metal, as you and I always say, why did we need new metal? We weren't finished with the old metal.
Correct.
So that was something that's passed us by. But I know a lot of the bands from earlier in the 80s, 10 years previously, found it a very tough time. The Linkin Parks and all that came along. And Anthrax probably would have found it very difficult to be accepted as a bit passé and a bit old school, because their music was so extreme when they came out alongside Metallica and Slayer and Megadeth, that it's hard to imagine that a time would come when they would suddenly be considered a bit passé. But I think that happened, and it was within 10 years, wasn't it, really? 1998.
Grunge comes along in 91, kills a load of metal, and then by the mid-90s, that calmed down a little bit. Peace has broken out. We can get back to stuff now. And then along comes new metal. It's like, Jesus Christ, just leave us alone.
Yes. What have we ever done to you?
And then a load of new metal comes along. Oh, no, we're taking over now. No.
So the album, Volume 8, The Threat Is Real, I think the threat was real from new metal, wasn't it? But it really didn't make much of an impact. I don't think it's something that people really talk about very much. But I think it's a really interesting record. It's got some really, really heavy stuff. Maybe it was just because it didn't sound like the Anthrax that had been successful, because John Bush's vocals are so different to Joey Belladonna's. A very diverse record. There's a song called Toast to the Extras, which is almost country feel to it.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. And also, there was a bonus track. I'm not sure if I've even heard the bonus tracks on it, but while I was doing my research, I found the bonus track. I don't think you could guess in a million years one of the covers that they did. English band.
Yeah.
Alternative band. Yeah. Very arty. Hugely successful. Very arty.
Blur.
No. More arty than that, I would say. No. Odd. Yeah, odd, but very, very successful. A band that you wouldn't imagine could have become really successful in England and in the States.
Radiohead.
Well done. How do you think they covered?
Creep.
No.
The Bends.
Yeah, the Bends. Ben's got the Bends, I know.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, interesting. Remind me, what was the lineup? Was Dan Spitz out of the band?
John Bush on vocals, Scott Ian on guitars, Frank Bello on bass, and Charlie Benante on drums. No, so they'd just gone down to one guitar player for this album. So, you know, the other interesting thing of who's on this album, there were a couple of guest appearances.
Okay.
Phil Anselmo and Dimebag Darrell.
Oh, so they got Pantera on board for a couple of tracks.
Yeah, and look how everything comes around, because where is Anthrax drummer Charlie Benante plying his trade these days?
With Pantera.
Alongside Anthrax, he's with Pantera, isn't he?
Yeah.
I interviewed Charlie this week.
Nice man.
I've known him for a long time. It was funny. I had contacted him via email, and we hadn't spoken for a while. And I sent him a photograph of me, him, and Scott in the ocean in the Bahamas together.
Yeah, I posted that photograph on our
There you
socials.
go. You saw the photo, yeah.
And it's him or Scotty and wearing a Run DMC t-shirt.
That's Charlie. Got a Run DMC t-shirt.
Yeah, and you've got the tightest shorts I've ever seen.
Yeah, the shorts are good. Wanger of the week territory. I had a Balaam and the Angel t-shirt on as well. Did you notice?
No, I didn't notice that.
So I was going out there flying the flag for not new metal, but new alternative.
All right.
And did you see Charlie's hair?
Yeah, brilliant.
It was tremendous, wasn't it? Massive.
Very Bobby Rondinelli.
The wind was blowing it all over his face. You remember?
Yeah.
It was really good. He was lovely, Charlie. I always got on really well with Charlie.
Where was that? Was that in the Bahamas or something?
Yeah, this is good. If you haven't listened to Volume 8 of The Threat Is Real, go and listen to it. But now we're on to an Anthrax trip. Literally a trip. And it made me think while I was listening to Volume 8 about probably the best single trip that I ever did when I was writing for Kerrang. And that was when I went out to the Bahamas to interview Anthrax when they were desperately trying to finish the Among the Living album. So that would be 87.
Why were they desperately trying to finish?
It just all run over. I think that they were still on Megaforce, or they might have just signed to Ireland at that point. Can't remember. But Johnny Z, who I think we've probably talked about on the podcast before, was their manager at the time. Johnny Z from Megaforce Records. He was a bit of an entrepreneur. He'd started out selling albums out of the garage of his house and had suddenly ended up discovering thrash, really. He was very influential on Metallica's earlier days. He signed Anthrax. In many ways, I suppose he was a pioneer. He did have the ears to see that there was something going on with the thrash metal thing, which most of us, frankly, didn't. Anyway, long story short, he was still managing the band. I'd known them, as I say, since 85, been one of the first people to interview them for Kerrang, so I had a good relationship with them. When they went to the Bahamas to record Among the Living, they brought Eddie Kramer along as producer. Eddie Kramer, who worked with Zeppelin, Lou Reed, Kiss, had a good reputation. For whatever reason, things didn't run too smoothly. I seem to remember after the event they were less than complimentary about Eddie Kramer's contribution to Among the Living. Little did I know that when I went there, it was all, oh, brilliant, go out to the Bahamas for a week or something stupid.
Who's coined this on Kerrang?
This would either be on Megaforce if they were still on Megaforce, or Ireland if they'd just signed. This was why I thought it was an interesting thing to talk about, Hunnsy. When you go back and look at it, I was living the dream. I was in the golden era. The days when record companies would literally go, would you like to go to the Bahamas for 7 days and maybe interview a rock band for 45 minutes? Yes, please.
Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant.
So I went out there with Ray Palmer, the legendary and much missed Kerrang photographer, and we were just basically hanging, because what we realised when we got there was that the band were massively behind schedule on getting the album finished, so they were really under the cosh. They weren't around all the time. We were left to our own devices quite a lot. But frankly, that suited me.
All inclusive.
Yeah, all inclusive it was. So Ray and I were just dossing about most of the time, because it was at Compass Point Studios, which was very famous at the time, wasn't it?
Yeah, and very expensive, I imagine.
Yeah, I imagine very expensive as well. But everyone would go, oh, Compass Point. Wow. Yeah, brilliant. So they were working there, and Ray and I were just kind of twiddling our thumbs a little bit. So we just spent loads of time at these little beach bars. It was just brilliant, hanging out and swimming in the sea and just having a great time, waiting for them to find a slot where we could go and do the interview and do the photos. Obviously, that photograph of me and Charlie and Scott was done at the same time as the photo session, when they presumably went, well, we've got to do this, so there's going to be an hour spent on that or whatever. Yeah. My abiding memory of that trip was, most of the time, it was me and Ray. We didn't see too much of the band, and frankly, it was brilliant. There was a little beach bar. We went there one night, Ray and I, and we sat at the bar, and it was a tiny little place. Probably only held about 15 people. We went and sat at the bar, two of us having a drink, chatting away, watching the world go by. Turn round, bloke walks in the door. It's Bono from U2.
Well, obviously, Charlie Benante would have been...
Yeah, Charlie would have lost his shit, wouldn't he? But it did make me think about the fact that It was the golden era, Hunnsy. I know it's kind of boring for people, I imagine, who are younger to be listening to old goats like us droning on about what the good old days were. But I think it's hard to argue against the idea that that was a golden period to be a rock journalist. Number one, there was no social media. So nobody could access music. Journalists' opinions mattered because it was the only way fans could get to hear what a record sounded like. Unless you listened to 1 hour of the Friday Rock Show in the UK, virtually nothing. In England, it was very, very important. And I think in America kind of was important. Even though they had American radio, we were considered tastemakers for whatever reason, rightly or wrongly. The Kerrang writers were considered to be tastemakers in America. Yeah. And so I think a lot of pressure was brought to bear from the big American record companies to the UK satellites to get after getting some of these writers to write about American rock bands, because if you could get that taste-making stuff at the start of a band's career, start of their cycle, it would help them get on the ladder. So we probably had more influence than we even imagined, because America was keen for us to like their bands as well. Fortunately, I don't think we really were thinking that intensely about it. In 87, I'd already been writing for Kerrang for 5 or 6 years, and in 87 I was still only 23.
Bloody hell.
It's mad, isn't it? When you look at it like that. Just a kid. I think it was a 2-parter on the cover of Kerrang.
Can you remember what the cover was?
It was Scott holding a load of studio tape reels all wrapped up in that. I think he had some kind of like a false parrot on his shoulder or something, like maybe a blow-up parrot. But I think that was the photograph. And there are lots of photographs of them all in the sea, and it just looks beautiful because the sea is such a deep blue and the sky's gorgeous, not a cloud in it. It's just amazing. It took me back. And when I was talking to Charlie the other day...
Did he remember it? Did he remember that?
Yeah, I think it was a big thing for them as well to be recording at Compass Point, because they were all kids at the time. The amazing thing was I was digging out a picture to go with the piece that I'm putting together for Rock Candy Mag, and Charlie just looks like a baby.
Yeah.
He just all looks so young.
Well, Dan Spitz always came across as someone who looked really young as well, didn't he? And,
yeah.
And he was tiny as well, wasn't he?
He was very, very tiny. Do you know what I always remember about Danny? I went to see them, I think, in Liverpool for a live review, and I was sitting with him in the dressing room before they went on, and he was just doing his warm-ups, with a small little practice amp.
Yeah.
And he was like a walking jukebox. You could ask him to play something and he could play it. I remember saying, play Same Old Song and Dance by Aerosmith. And he just, that's easy, that. He could play anything. So easy for him.
He went and became a watchmaker or something.
A master watchmaker.
Well, is there a difference?
Yeah, I think he had to go and train in Switzerland and all that kind of stuff.
The next episode, you can talk about the FM Malta trip.
Yeah, because we haven't talked about that, have we?
We haven't. The FM Malta trip, and my favourite part of that is the Pete Jupp interview trousers.
So we'll dangle that little teaser. FM drummer Pete Jupp and his interview trousers will be discussed in full. Considering it's trousers, there'll be a full debriefing next time, won't there? We're probably done for this week, aren't we, mate?
I think we are. We've done the Throbs album.
We've done Anthrax, and we've done freebie trips to the Bahamas. Oh, and talking about rock and roll cruises. So, you're getting a lot for your money there.
I've got news. Still the email, HoJo and Hunnsy, gmail.com, Facebook, HoJo and Hunnsy's Hard Rock House. We're still on Instagram. Undeterred. We will still be on Instagram.
What's the address?
HoJo_and_Hunnsy. But
okay, good.
We are now on Blue Sky.
Blue Sky. Exciting times.
Just look for Blue Sky. It's a social...
You go to Blue Sky and you look for HoJo and Hunnsy's Hard Rock House.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a safer space.
It's a safer space, and we like safe spaces, as we say at the top of every programme. Exciting times. And as I always say, if you can just tell one other person about the beauty of HoJo and Hunnsy's Hard Rock House, we will be taking old metal to the world, one set of ears at a time.
Well, look, I'll speak to you next week.
Yeah, all right, same time, same place. We'll be there talking nonsense.
Yeah.
All right, lovely boy. Have a super week, and I'll see you again, same time, same place.
See you there.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye.